On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, one of America's leading urban public libraries, delivering exceptional services and programs with a mission to improve lives and build a stronger community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
As I was growing up, I always saw E.C. Griffith signs around Charlotte, and I always saw them on the best properties. And I always said, who is this E.C. Griffith? And how did he get all the best properties in the city? But as I got a little older, I said, I want to be like E.C. Griffith's company. I want to be able to be a part of the best properties in Charlotte. And then as I came back to Charlotte, and I watched Smokey Bissell and how he operated and his philosophy and strategy, I said, really, I want to operate our company a lot like Smokey. And so I hope one of these days that we'll achieve those goals.
Daniel Levine is president of Levine Properties, a family-owned property investment company that develops, owns, and operates commercial and residential properties in Charlotte, North Carolina, and in select urban locations throughout the United States. Levine Properties owns over 20 acres of contiguous blocks of largely undeveloped property in the First Ward District in the center of the city of Charlotte. As president, Daniel is responsible for the development, leasing, and asset management of all properties owned. In this episode, we explore real estate investment, property development, and the challenges and responsibility of creating a neighborhood in the center of a city. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Dan, welcome.
Thank you.
Dan, you own nearly 20 acres of property in First Ward in the center of the city of Charlotte. It is prime real estate that is largely undeveloped. You have controlled the property for over 30 years. What's taking so long?
Well, that's a fair question. That's a good question. And it's not an easy answer. And it has taken 34 years to assemble all of this property. And in fact, I will close on our last piece in the next 45 days after chasing it for some 25 years. And, I think in many regards, assembling the land took a long time, figuring out what to do with it as Charlotte was growing from 1984 to 2018. It took a lot of thought. And then I think we were simply unprepared for the velocity of growth that took place in the center city. As the banks were merging and buying other banks and bringing all of that employment and the associated employment with all of the bank's vendors, there was no way for us to think about that Charlotte was growing so fast. And part of that is that in the private sector, which we are a private developer, we fund our own projects. If you can't lease it at a price point, you can't finance it, and therefore you shouldn't build it. And so, we come from a fairly conservative viewpoint, and every time we thought that we had a great idea to build something, Mr. McCall or Mr. Crutchfield would either merge or buy another bank, and they would build their own office product. There was no market for retail at the time. There was certainly no market for residential in the 80s and 90s. And so we just didn't know what to do. And all we knew is that our city was changing faster than any city our size or bigger in the United States. It was breathtaking. And so we didn't know what to build. I think I've employed almost every master planner in the country, and we have a great pile of master plans that are almost ridiculous to look at because they would have woefully underbuilt this neighborhood. And we are, at the end of the day, committed to building a great urban neighborhood that fairly represents what Charlotte has become over the last 30 years. In 1999, we competed for the city and the county properties, and we hired Cooper Carey as our master planner, and I made them put a 10-story residential building at the corner of 7th and Brevard. Now, that was only 19 years ago, and now we have a 50-story residential building in Charlotte. So it's truly unbelievable what has happened in our center city.
Let's imagine the year is 2030. That's 12 years from now. What will we see in First Ward?
Well, I think you're going to see a great collection of residential projects. You'll see a great collection of street-level retail. I think you'll see more office buildings. I think you'll see a reimagined Charlotte library. But mostly, I think you're going to see a development footprint that is perhaps different than what we built over the past 35 years, which is to say that we're not a business park anymore. We are a fully functioning 18-hour city that has people living here, working here, shopping here, recreating here, coming to enjoy arts and cultural sports activities. And I think the First Ward and the North Tryon plan will respond to that marketplace.
What is coming out of the ground now on your property?
So what you might see is a 9-story, 1,400-car parking garage that was part of the city-county tax increment grant project when we rebuilt the infrastructure in First Ward along with delivering a county park. And it will get wrapped with apartments. Now, interestingly enough, when we first designed that project, we designed a 6-story wood-framed project. And we reconsidered that. It was 254 units. And, I just felt like we were underbuilding the site. And so we actually stopped that project, terminated that project. And we hired Perkins Eastman, and they've come up with a 11-story, 420-unit building that I think is superior architecture in many regard, and I think sets the tone for the rest of what will happen in the First Ward area. I'm really excited about the facade of the parking garage that faces I-277. We've engaged an architect and an artist to do that, and the news on that will be forthcoming, but I think the city and the region will be awfully excited about it.
How is that development setting the stage for what you want to do next on your other pieces of property?
Well, if you go around the center city, you see a great number of parking garages that dominate the landscape, but more importantly, they dominate the streetscape. And it creates street frontages that are either blank walls or just garage openings, and that's just not a great urban environment. And so what we've done with this project is we've created a district, one of several district parking garages that we'll put throughout First Ward, which will allow us to build retail directly onto the street frontage that is not a token retail frontage with parking garage behind. And I think that this sets up a different building pattern than some of the other projects in the center city. And our commitment to bringing great street front activities will be demonstrated because we're not required to put these parking garages on every block to satisfy parking requirements.
Dan, you've talked frequently about a concept called Market Street. What is the idea behind Market Street?
So I thought one of the most impactful developments to occur in the center city was when Bank of America built 7th Street Station, and Reed's was the anchor tenant at the ground floor, which was one of the first grocery stores to come to the center city. And if anybody who was here at that time recalls, there was a one-way street that paralleled the trolley line at the time with one on-street parking space. And anybody who's involved with retail knows that even though there was only just a few number of spaces, that teaser parking in the front and that roadway certainly helped the retail. Ultimately, the light rail line took that street and parking space out, but it had impact on me so that when we designed the park and we had 8th Street coming through the park with a highly amenitized cross-section of pavers and granite cobbles and sidewalk, we wanted to extend that experience along what we called Market Street, which was a 2-lane street, two-way traffic, one on-street parking space that stretched from 7th Street to 9th Street. And most importantly, it was fronted with retail. And so we wanted to bring an opportunity that had people that were able to come to the park, but also have a retail-like experience just off the park. And so Market Street had the same cross-section, and we believe when it's built will serve as a gathering spot in this neighborhood.
When do you anticipate that we'll actually be able to walk down Market Street and have that experience?
I think that with Lennar having started their construction, they're going to build the first leg of Market Street between 9th over to 8th Street, and we will at the same time build our leg from 8th Street over to 7th Street. So in a 24-month period of time, or as Lennar finishes up and opens their project, which will include 20,000 square feet, Market Street, or whatever we ultimately are able to name it, it will open at the same time.
Dan, your property complements a larger district vision called the North Tryon Vision Plan. What is the North Tryon Vision Plan, and how does your master plan work in concert with it?
The North Tryon Vision Plan was initiated by Charlotte Center City Partners, the City of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, the library, and a number of other private institutions, along with the Foundation for the Carolina. And the idea was to put into place a plan that brought a new vision of how the urban environment could be developed to attract more residential, office, retail, a host of other urban forms, but different than what has taken place in Charlotte to date. In other words, a more modern adaptation to an urban plan. And so what you find is the plan calls for smaller block sizes with paseos bisecting those blocks, which allow for more pedestrian activity and more frontage of buildings fronting onto these paseos, which is just maybe smaller footprints, but with more retail and, again, an opportunity to serve the growing residential population with not only perhaps a grocery store on Tryon Street, but also some of the secondary service retail that a concentration of urban residential folks like to have in close proximity to their buildings.
Dan, I want to talk about the weight and consequence of the work that you're doing. You may be the only developer in the nation who has 30 odd acres of contiguous property in the center of a major metropolitan city. Your decisions will determine how hundreds of thousands of people will experience Charlotte for generations to come. How does that feel?
Well, I think it comes with a great responsibility. I have always felt that the Levine's investment in the center city came with great responsibility. And if we were only interested in profit, we would have converted this investment into profit many years ago. But it just so happens that my father and his two brothers, who were from Rockingham, North Carolina, came to Charlotte in the mid to late 50s. And by 1960, each of those three brothers had their own retail store in one block of Central Avenue. And, as a matter of fact, I worked pick and pay shoes on Central Avenue in high school and went to Piedmont Middle School on 10th Street. So I used to take the city bus to the square and transfer over to 10th Street when I was in 8th and 9th grade. So my love of the city, and in fact, our family's success comes from Charlotte. And so our land in the center city is a way for our family to continue to give back to the city that has been so good to us. And cities grow incrementally over time. And for one family, one small family, to have such an investment comes with great responsibility. And so what we've concentrated on is to make certain that what we do is of the highest quality, is one that can stand the test of time. And that's a hard thing for a small private development company to undertake because that always costs more money. And so whether we develop it or whether somebody else develops it, we are going to require that it be in the very best interest of our city. I've always said, if what we help cause to happen is in the best interest of our region and our city, it will be in the Levine's best interest as well.
Are you ever overwhelmed by this responsibility?
No, not really. I approach this in a consistent manner every day. And what we do is we assess what we think is in the best interest of a piece of property, and we set out to execute that plan. Sometimes it takes longer than expected, and so I've learned in my business career to have patience. Patience usually is rewarded. And I think that even though it has taken us a long time to get to the starting blocks, in the next number of years as this property gets converted from parking lots and raw land to vertical development, I hope people will look back and say, this was well done.
Do you ever worry that you're not getting it right?
Well, not really. I think that I'm usually a measure 3 times, cut once kind of guy, and I think that we're making good decisions.
Do you think any one person or family should control so much property?
So in 1984, when I came back from school, and I started mapping out 9 square blocks in First Ward, and I said to my father, wouldn't it be great if we could assemble all this land, not really understanding what that meant or what it was going to take, but nevertheless set out to do that. And over the last 34 years, with the exception of one piece of property in 9 square blocks, we were the only purchasers of property. In other words, only one other person over 34 years bought a piece of land in those 9 square blocks. So I thought I was either the dumbest guy on the planet, or one day this investment was going to bear fruit. And I'm here to tell you, I think that the latter will prove true.
Dan, many of the blocks that you control have one or two old buildings on it. Why?
Well, as I was assembling and buying this property, there was a great collection of old buildings throughout this section of the city. Many of them were old industrial buildings that had really no redeeming value. But as you drive through First Ward now, you see some fantastic historic buildings. So as an example, in the corner of the park, where Google Fiber is located, is an old two-story industrial building built around 1898. It was a hardware store. And many people might recall that it was Dixie's Tavern for many years. And Google Fiber came and wanted that building, and I think showed that with great architectural talent, you can convert old buildings to new purposes in wonderful ways. And so it just so happens that one block away at the corner of 7th and Brevard is the William Treelor building. A lot of people affectionately call it the Bail Bondsman building. So to my knowledge, I think it's one of the older residential structures left in the center city, built in 1873 by William Treelor. And I can't wait to renovate that building. I'm hopeful one day that it becomes a great gathering spot for food and beverage and entertainment. But as you go around each of our blocks, you will find quality old buildings of the ones that I thought were worth keeping. And so you might find another one of the buildings at the corner of 9th and the light rail line, where the Charlotte Lab School is. It was the Nabisco Cookie Warehouse. So there's great history in Charlotte, and we have torn down a lot of old buildings, but we have kept a few.
Dan, how do you go about your work? What's a typical day in the life of Dan Levine?
Well, I'm pretty consistent. I wake up early. I'd like to read the Observer and the Wall Street Journal, although, quite honestly, it doesn't take as much time to read the Observer too much anymore. And, I set off about my day, and, I get to the office, and I've got a great number of responsibilities, both in the real estate business as well as, since my father passed away, running our family office. And so there's always more to do in any given day than I have time to accomplish. But, I love it.
How much time does the development of First Ward take up?
Well, right now we're trying to pursue a handful of opportunities. So I'm concentrating on, I spend a lot of time on First Ward.
Dan, what informs your vision of a neighborhood?
I think travel to other great cities and walking neighborhoods in those cities and finding out where people like to congregate, where people like to live, reading as much as I can get my hands on other people's ideas about what makes great cities and what makes good places. And, it really revolves around what people want to do in their free time. Eating, people like to eat. And so restaurants and good food is usually an attraction that I like to see around cities. I'm a dives, diner, and drive-in kind of guy, not a white tablecloth. And so I really enjoy restaurants that cater to a broad cross-section of people. I think the reason that it takes so long for cities to change and mature is that it takes many hands to create great places. And quite honestly, that is one of the things that has always terrified me about our responsibility here in First Ward. And that is, how do we lay down the first structural framework so that people can come and put their stamp on this neighborhood and do it in such a way that's authentic? It's real hard not to have a project that turns out to be monolithic in nature when one hand touches it. And, of course, engaging in conversation with many great minds around architecture development is important.
Is there a neighborhood in the United States that you walk through and you think, this is the kind of place that I imagine for First Ward? What neighborhoods or walking districts in this country come to mind that inspire you?
Well, so my mother was from Kansas City, and she lived pretty close to Country Club Plaza, which J.C. Nichols built in the 1920s. And it was really the first suburban shopping mall that turned into a great infill neighborhood. And as I was growing up, we would go to visit my grandparents, and we would always go to the plaza. And what I found out over a number of years is the plaza is where families and people in Kansas City would go to celebrate life's memories. So Thanksgiving and the lighting of the plaza for the Christmas lights was always very exciting. But throughout the year, people would go there for Easter and for birthdays and for anniversaries and for graduations. There was no question that that was the living room for the city. And, I always thought about that. And Charlotte, when you say, well, where's the living room for Charlotte? And I think you're hard-pressed to find that. I always thought that if I was really good at what I did, that First Ward might possibly have a chance to become that place.
Do you think it might be?
I hope so.
Is there a philosophy that guides what you do?
We are conservative investors in real estate. And as you might look around First Ward, you see that we haven't really invested in too much other than the land, cleaning up the land, and waiting for the market to come to us, which I think it has now. And I think if we had to earn our living out of our investment in the First Ward, we would be hard-pressed. We do a lot of other things around the city and, frankly, the country that have been very good. But First Ward does have a separate and distinct agenda for us.
But these properties in First Ward have been income producing for you, haven't they?
Yeah, we do have buildings that have tenants. We do have parking lots that generate income. But if you hope that the development around these light rail stations are going to be developed in such a way that are dense enough to justify its position in our center city, then the market has to really kind of come to you. And right now, or up until now, I didn't believe that the market was here. We've tried to do this before, and I've learned valuable lessons over the years in Charlotte, in First Ward, that when you're ahead of your time, you can lose money. It comes back to, in center cities, every block by block has importance and value. And when you're not in the right spot, and there's not the foot traffic to support ground level retail, you truly are hard pressed to give it away. And in fact, in some cases, you can't give it away.
Dan, let's talk about you, your life, your family. Your last name, Levine, is a prominent one in this city. You are part of an extensive family tree. How do you tell the story of the Levine family?
Well, my father, Al Levine, came from Rockingham, North Carolina. He won a WBT radio scholarship to go to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He was born in Hamlet. And I always say you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. And my father was a terrific, terrific gentleman. And I learned a great deal from him. And, his brothers, Sherman and Leon, and his sister, Dorothy, all terrific people. And I think with as big a family as we had, with as many first cousins as I enjoyed growing up, and we were all here in Charlotte, it was a very warm and engaging family.
Your grandparents were Harry and Minnie Levine, who owned a department store. Retail has been in the family for a while.
Yeah, it's funny. My father always would tell the story when he was 7 years old, he would get up and go work at the store. And he would work there, after school, on the weekends. And by the time he went to Chapel Hill and went to a business school in marketing, he says to the professor, I've already taken this class. So retail has been in our family. As I said earlier, my father, his two brothers, each had retail stores on Central Avenue. My father had Pick and Pay Shoes, which grew to be a large East Coast chain of shoe stores, and his brother Leon started and grew Family Dollar. My father's first store was where Workman's Friend is, and I think the first Family Dollar store was across the street, mid-block. I think there's a reggae store, and then Sherman's Limited was on the same side of the street as Pick and Pay, just down the block. In fact, I have in my office a picture of my father and his two brothers in 1960, arm in arm, walking down Central Avenue.
What were your family gatherings like?
Loud, lots and lots of kids. Living here in Charlotte, growing up in Charlotte, it was, a smaller southern city that it was an idyllic childhood in many respects, and always felt that Charlotte was the center of my world. And I love Charlotte.
Dan, where did you go to school?
So I went to Rama Road Elementary and McClintock Junior High and Piedmont Middle School, and graduated from East Meck.
And where did you go to college?
I graduated from Chapel Hill.
And what did you study?
I studied city and regional planning. I came out of psychology one day and came across this little building, Old East, and that was the School of City and Regional Planning. And I walked in and I found a professor there, Shirley Weiss, who at that time was the foremost academic in the field of new town design and development. And I had found my home.
What were your ambitions?
Well, I used to go to work with my father on Saturday mornings. And I remember, I was 7 or 8 years old. This was in the 67, 68 time frame. And I remember reading a Forbes or Fortune article about Walt Disney's original dream of Epcot, experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And I couldn't believe what he was talking about, building a new town from the ground up for 100,000 people where they could live, work, play, get educated, all from the ground. I just couldn't believe it. And from that moment on, I was really smitten with real estate. And so when I came across Shirley Weiss, it was like, I'm telling you, it was like coming home. And I was able to, she sponsored me for an undergraduate interdisciplinary studies degree, and it was the best education I could have.
Just like Walt Disney bought up property that was contiguous in the center of Florida, did you go about purchasing property in the center of Charlotte to essentially be the Walt Disney of Charlotte?
Part of my studies is I was able to focus on Charlotte, and I was reading about what Hugh McCall and North Carolina National Bank was doing to help renovate and revive our center city. And I read about a guy by the name of Dennis Rash, who was tasked by Mr. McCall to help rebuild Fourth Ward neighborhood. This was in the 81 time frame. And I was so impressed with how the bank was committed to helping build the community. And so I studied all about Charlotte in school. And so when I came back from school, I naturally knew a little bit more about the center city and began spending time here. And I loved even though it's funny to say now, I loved the energy of the center city because, as I said earlier, I would come here when I was 13, 14 years old to transfer and go off to middle school. And I remember in 1974, the Bank of America Plaza, the black building at the square, was under construction. And I would actually go into the construction site, go up the the construction elevator to the 34th, 35th floor, go over to the edge and have a look. I mean, can you imagine a child today going onto a construction site? Frightening.
But did you have a bit of Disney in you, of thinking that you had the opportunity to build your own Epcot one day in the center of the city if you controlled enough land?
No, actually, when I was able to study and learn about the Newtown movement in America, cities like Columbia, Maryland, or Reston, Virginia, or the Woodlands in Texas, Soul City, North Carolina, there were many that just frankly did not work. And the ones that did work were the ones that I paid attention to. And so after graduating from Chapel Hill, I came back to Charlotte and together with my father started Levine Properties. And we weren't in any position to build any new towns, I can tell you that. It was really about real estate development and management.
What was the thinking behind Levine Properties? What did you intend the business to be? Buy and hold and generate income? Or was it a development company?
Well, when I came back to Charlotte, I think I was 22. I didn't know anything about anything. And yet I was confident enough to think that I could start Levine Properties, which I did. And I really did not know what we were going to be. But I will say that my father, who had sold his business the year I went off to college and retired the year I came back from college, he was my partner, and he was always of our business, but he retired and moved to Florida for half the year. And he left me a great number of pearls of wisdom. And a few of the things that hold true to me today is he said, look, if you build good real estate and you take care of your tenants and customers, at the end of the day, they will take care of you. And he says, and if you build good real estate, there's no reason to sell it. And so these are the things that I have to this day, the foundations of how we run our business. He also said, if you don't bleed your business and you let the profits stay in the business, then you will wake up one day and you will be surprised at how much net worth you've been able to create over time. And again, at 22, I didn't know what he was talking about. But at 57, I know exactly what he's talking about because we followed those principles. And we've invested, we've stayed true to those principles, and we've operated a very conservative business.
Dan, your dad died in August 2016. After his death, you changed your approach to developing First Ward. What was that change?
Yeah, a lot of people think that I was the real entrepreneur in the family, but that's not true. My father was a true entrepreneur. Right up until the time he died, he was the one who was pushing to make investments and do development, and it was me who was measure 3 times, cut once, and so when he passed, first of all, business became a lot less fun for me, because he was our biggest cheerleader. He loved business, and so we did change our thinking, our philosophy. Where at one point I thought that we would be able to take on a lot of this development, but after my father's passing and recognizing my responsibilities both in our real estate business and our family, I had to take a more sober approach and shift our strategy and our thinking a little bit.
How would you describe that strategy today?
Well, I think that it's a multifaceted approach where we do some development that's within the capacity of our company, but more and more it is reaching out to do joint ventures with companies that meet our philosophy of business, along with perhaps selling certain assets because we just simply can't do it all. And moreover, as a fiduciary in our family office, I can't take the risks that we once did.
Do you ever think about the time that you have left to realize your vision for First Ward?
I do. So I'm 57. My father passed away when he was 83. So that's a short 26 years from now. And so, will I be able to be a part of finishing all of the development that's going to take place in First Ward? Something I do think about. I don't know the answer. I hope that we get to see the majority of it. But Charlotte will continue to grow long after I'm gone. First Ward will continue to evolve long after I'm gone. I think the thing I think about is, am I putting in place the right foundation for it to be a great urban neighborhood? And we won't know that until well after I'm gone. I do believe with all my being that Charlotte will be a great city. As I was growing up, I always saw E.C. Griffith signs around Charlotte. And I always saw them on the best properties. And I always said, who is this E.C. Griffith? And how did he get all the best properties in the city? But as I got a little older, I said, I want to be like E.C. Griffith's company. I want to be able to be a part of the best properties in Charlotte. And then as I came back to Charlotte and I watched Smokey Bissell and how he operated and his philosophy and strategy, I said, really, I want to operate our company a lot like Smokey. And so I hope one of these days that we'll achieve those goals. I am one of 5 children. I've got an older brother and an older sister and a younger brother and a younger sister. So I'm right in the middle. And out of 5 kids, I'm the only one with children. So I've got, a 10-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter. And I think it's a little early to tell, but I'm hopeful that one or both will gain an appreciation for business and real estate. But more, I really want them to ascend to be part of the great traditions that my uncles and my father put forth here in Charlotte, and hopefully I've contributed to that so that we can continue some of the traditions of the Levines giving back to our community.
Is there a project you're particularly proud of?
Our strategy in almost every development that I've ever done is to build the very best project that I can afford, because our intention is to own it for a long period of time. Will it stand the test of time? And I don't have any one project that is the penultimate of my career, but I think in collection, I would say that they were all competently produced and have served the purpose to which they've been built very nicely, and that the tenants that have been there in some cases for 30 plus years continue to enjoy the buildings. Again, I'm not one that gets out to beat my chest, and so my projects don't do that either.
Is there a project you're particularly excited about on the horizon?
So we're working on a project right now at the corner of Providence Road and Fairview Roads, which is a very significant mixed-use development. It's got a Harris Teeter and medical office, and I think it'll be the first time ever that self-storage is built subterranean underneath a parking garage with inline retail and apartments. And it is going to be a new center for that neighborhood in conjunction with some of the other development that's happening around it. So I'm really excited because it'll bring a level of architecture to that intersection that'll be pretty exciting.
Dan, how do you want to be remembered?
That's a question I don't think much about. I wake up every day, try to do the very best I can. My father had an expression, you do the best you can because that's all you can do. I am not one to be out in the public eye. I really would rather be behind the curtain a little bit and just be part of great work. and my commitment, my life is here in Charlotte. And so whatever I do, I hope I leave whatever I touch here in Charlotte better than, when I started. Time will tell.
Dan, thank you for your time today.
Mark, thank you.
Daniel Levine is president of Levine Properties. He earned a BA in City and Regional Planning and Development from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And now, a personal word. In the movie The Candidate, Robert Redford plays a young lawyer running for the U.S. Senate against an older, well-funded incumbent. Redford has no chance to win, so he feels free to say exactly what he wants. He starts rising in the polls. Before long, Redford wins the race. In the last scene, Redford, stunned that he actually won, turns to his political consultant and delivers the line, "What do we do now?" I thought of the movie as I listened to Daniel Levine. He spent years accumulating property in the center of the city of Charlotte, a quest all its own. Over decades, Daniel pieced together over 30 acres of land in a part of the city that no one else was interested in. It took meticulous planning, patience, and dozens of transactions for him to tie together 9 contiguous city blocks. Once he collected it, I imagine him asking, "What do we do now?" Imagination is at the heart of real estate. I can only imagine what it's like to own 9 blocks of prime undeveloped land in the center of a city. In fact, I can only imagine it because I have imagined it nearly every day for 18 years. That's how long I have lived in First Ward. My home is just a few yards away from the many blocks of land that Daniel Levine owns. I have walked across his property 1,000 times. The parking lots and grassy knolls and pebbled asphalt and sandlot fields. On all that undeveloped space, I have imagined townhomes and brownstones and high-rises and campus buildings and bookstores. I have imagined restaurants and cafes and neighborhood pubs. I've imagined walkways and cobblestone streets. I have followed announcements of projects and wondered with neighbors when it all might come to pass. I imagine however long I have imagined it, Daniel Levine has imagined it far more. It's his property after all. Right after college, when most young adults are balancing their checkbooks for the first time, Daniel started buying up derelict land in First Ward. As he noted, it was either a fool's errand or visionary genius. As the center city of Charlotte has developed around his property, with museums and apartments and rapid transit, Daniel made the right bet. Now everyone else is waiting for him to build what they imagine on land he owns. And Daniel Levine is building. We see First Ward Park, a lively 4-acre green space and community gathering spot. We see the UNC Charlotte Center City building, an architecturally distinct academic tower with a street-level bookstore, art gallery, and cafe. We see a 1,300-space parking deck that will be wrapped by 11 floors of steel and concrete, framing a 428-unit apartment complex with signature public art. We see demolition underway on another block that will soon become a 33-story high-rise apartment building beside a 6-story mid-rise apartment complex alongside a 2-block market street of stores and shops and restaurants. All of it is exciting, and all of it is to the credit of Daniel Levine. Bill Gates famously said, "We always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years, and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. In the year 2028, the land Daniel Levine owns today may be unrecognizable. It might be a fully realized neighborhood. Of course, I did think that 10 years ago. So it's more probable that it will be a partially realized neighborhood. A real one with people and pets and scooters and flying cars. I can hardly wait. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, Art and Media Director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.